This program is made possible in part thanks to generous donations from viewers like you.
I expect this to be a historic day across Southwest Florida for all the wrong reasons. This is going to be one of the strongest storms that we have ever seen. There now has been an upgrade in our surge potential from 8 to 12 feet to now 12 to 16 feet. And the problem is that Ian is going to be making landfall at high tide. And this storm is going to bring life-threatening flooding to parts of our area.
Hello and welcome. We dedicate this show to the people of Southwest Florida. On September 28th, everything changed. The Florida Medical Examiner reports 102 deaths, 3 from Manatee County, 7 from Sarasota County. The cost and devastation to land and property is overwhelming. In the wake of Hurricane Ian, we search for answers and lessons learned. For meteorologists, a 100-year event means statistically it happens only once every 100 years. It does not mean it won't happen again next week. And that is the point. Not only are we having more storms, they are stronger, larger, and they last longer. According to Florida State University's Climate Center, we have had 2 Cat 4s and 1 Cat 5 since 2017. You have to go all the way back to Andrew and 92 for the previous Cat 5. Gulf surges over 10 feet, catastrophic flooding, homes washed away. It's hard to imagine a more disruptive and dangerous transportation situation than the closing of Interstate 75.
And we're back with breaking news right now. Major backups on I-75 near Northport after the Myakka River overflowed, making part of the roadway impassable for drivers.
Fortunately, the closure occurred after the 100-plus miles an hour winds came through. One can only imagine what might have happened if drivers trying to evacuate had been caught with no escape route in the middle of I-75.
Saturday morning at 1 o'clock in the morning, I heard the sound of the water coming through my bedroom door. I called my one neighbor. I said, "Wally, the water's coming." And then I called 911, and it took an hour and a half to come get me. I had to climb up the golf cart, and I watched the water just rise and rise and rise.
At 3 a.m. on Saturday morning, Sarasota County Sheriff's Office issued an emergency alert that a levee was in danger of breaching. Built on wetlands in the 1960s, Hidden River has just under 100 home sites. In 2017, after Hurricane Irma, a state dam inspection described the need for repairs as critical. Right as the community was about to finalize a state grant, Sarasota County determined they were not eligible because the property is privately owned. Amazingly, what happened at Hidden River is not unique. Back in the day, developers did as they pleased. There were few regulations. Communities were built in floodplains, along rivers, and on the coastlines. Private levees were built which are not even regulated or inspected anymore, which leads us to the next part of the story. Insurance. Florida is already in meltdown mode. Companies are going bankrupt. Policies are being canceled. Premiums are skyrocketing. And that was before Ian. Annual insurance rates in Florida are 3 times higher than the national average. When the total is known, experts are saying Ian will cost between $25 and $40 billion. This could have a devastating impact on the housing industry, especially affordable housing. We will be talking more about that later. But first, Robert Bunting. You're focused on Florida's current and future climate warming. Give us your assessment of Sarasota County. How are we doing?
Well, as far as the climate goes, I don't know if many people realize this because I think we feel like a frog in the water. You know, it's going up a little at a time and we're not noticing as much as we should. But we've had 9 inches of sea level rise in Sarasota already since 1950. So that's quite a bit of our margin that is now gone. We've also seen about a 5-degree Fahrenheit warming in our temperatures since 1970, especially in the wintertime and especially at night. And we see that in the summertime where our low temperatures now sometimes don't go below 80 degrees, for example. We've seen that Category 5 and Category 4 hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin, which is the basin where we get our hurricanes from, have doubled since 1990, doubled. The number of storms has gone up by about 20% as well. But what we're seeing is not that we're having the storms themselves aren't the issue. It's the Category 4 and 5 storms that are experiencing rapid intensification. So what we're seeing in our climate is a big change. But what we're not seeing in the way we behave is we're behaving like it's the 1990s, 80s, or 70s. And we really haven't upgraded our thinking to the climate we have now versus the climate we used to have.
Tell us how the Climate Adaptation Center connects the public, private, and academic sectors.
So, you know, I've always been in my roles a person who links these sectors together to get big things done. And the United States has the most amazing culture when it comes to that. That's why we're so innovative. It's because we push the government sector, the private sector, and the academic sector together, and we create this intersection I call the blur. And in that blur is where all the innovation really occurs in our country. And this is where we solve big problems. For example, when in World War II, the nuclear bomb project was in that blur. The space program was in that blur. And any of the great achievements we have been in that location. Now that we have this climate issue that's not just one for us, but for the world, it's up to the United States and us in our local area to create this intersection. And the CAC is that on climate warming.
So give us some examples of filters that should be in place for zoning and building code regulations.
Well, one of the things we've seen, we've had 2 close to Category 5 or Category 5 hurricanes in just a few years in Florida. Michael hit Mexico Beach, and of course, Ian was just 2 miles an hour less than a Category 5 when it hit Southwest Florida. And you can see in the debris on both of those locations that a few buildings seem like they were untouched. And the reason for it is because they were super built to standards above and beyond codes, and the buildings did just fine. So what we know is that we have the ability to build better buildings that can withstand stronger storms. But now we actually have to do that. But overall, I think what we really need is to think of this, and let's take our Sarasota metro area as the example, but we can't have disparate organizations doing disparate things. We can't have Siesta Key managing their beach different than the beach that we have at Leedy or the ones that we have on Longboat Key. We need a regional approach to climate warming, and the solutions that we put in need to be regional. The building codes need to be regional. The zoning laws need to be regional. every little town and city cannot do its own thing because the atmosphere doesn't know where these boundaries are. And it's affecting our region uniformly, and we're acting differently. So we need to coordinate our approach across our region to be successful in mitigating the worst impacts of climate warming.
So, are you saying that the municipal and county regulatory process is itself outdated?
I am saying that it's outdated. It does not, most of those rules, not all of them, they've been upgraded over time, but most of them are the child of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. And now that we have a different world that we're living in, they need to be modernized so that the way we consider these threats and the risk is coordinated and up to date with the science and engineering that we now have. And then that needs to be applied to every new project we do, whether we're building a school or retrofitting a road or building a traffic circle or upgrading Bayfront Park. And it's very interesting to see, for instance, Bayfront Park is doing that kind of integration on their own because it's a public-private partnership. But we don't always see that when we, let's say, build a new road or upgrade an old one. We're still doing it the way we used to do, and it's not effective in a climate-warmed world.
Right. So let's talk about the specific priorities, like the evacuation routes, Interstate 75, construction in downtown. Are we using the right filters to make data-based decisions?
I would say no. I would say the filters are outdated. And I'll give you an example. And this is really not to pick on one project because it's just an example that I know about. But these kinds of things are going on all over the place in Florida. And it's because we're so used to doing a thing a certain way, we haven't really, upgraded our thinking. And that's what we need to do now. But we have a beautiful new, very expensive traffic circle going in downtown Sarasota. And I think it's going to be quite amazing when it's finished and how much it helps our traffic situation. But at the same time, while part of that road was raised, the very critical entry to the traffic circle from Lido Key and the Sarasota Bridge, there's about a 400 or 500 foot section of road there that at high tide is about a foot or a foot and a half above mean high tide level on a fair day. It doesn't make sense to me that we didn't raise that road at the same time, given that it is the chief evacuation route from like St. Armand Circle, from South Longboat Key, where we can have tens of thousands of people. And I think what the thinking is well, we'll have a long warning time and we can get these people off the island. But what we have seen is in these super developing hurricanes, they can super intensify in a matter of 12 to 24 hours. Ian did that twice in 48 hours. And when that happens, the amount of warning time we have to evacuate people could be routinely less than 24 hours. And you can't get that many people over that bridge in that short time. So raising that deck, that roadway approaching the bridge from downtown Sarasota and the egress going into the traffic circle from St. Armand Circle will give hours more flexibility for people to leave. What we don't want is a road that goes underwater before the hurricane is even here.
Final question, Bob. You have a home here. You understand the challenges Florida faces. What happens if we don't get it together? What's Sarasota going to look like in 5 years, 10 years if we fail?
Well, the warming is ongoing. What people don't really understand is the rate of warming has doubled since 1990. So it's not just the amount of warming we're having, but how fast it's increasing. And that's going on with sea level rise and some of these other things like storms and red tides. the impacts on human health, the lowering of our biodiversity. And all of these trends right now are quite negative. But we live in a super intelligent society. We're trying to lower our carbon footprint, which is a good thing. But we have the biggest carbon thing right here. It's our brain. And we have to use it now because we have choices we can make. We have to put the self-interest of individuals aside for the common good of our community so we can protect our Florida way of life. And that means we're just going to have to behave differently than we have behaved because the threat is so much more now. So we have the opportunity. I'm very optimistic that we will use all of our capabilities in technology and our carbon brains to mitigate the risk and lower the risk. We're going to get hit by these kinds of storms, but they don't need to be as catastrophic as they were in Fort Myers Beach if we do the right things now. But we can't wait because time has run out now. That's what we have found out. In our climate conference last November, for example, at USF, we predicted a storm that had all the characteristics of Ian, and even I didn't think it was coming this year. So it's happening, and we have to say, this is not a fluke. Michael was not a fluke. Ian is not a fluke. Southwest Florida and the West Florida coast is going to be hit more often by stronger storms. And we have choices we can make. We need to make them.
Absolutely. We are all going to have to make changes, individuals, businesses, and governments. For that, Sarasota City Manager Marlon Brown, starting with lessons learned from Hurricane Irma.
One of the things that we really learned this time around that we, did not do last time when, Irma was here was that we shut off the water on the barrier islands, basically trying to force people off of those barrier islands because of the threat of the storm surge. Other areas that we felt that was a little fragile or could have been impacted was, areas along the bayfront. And so, what do we do in the future with those? Do we, have a strategy to also cut off the water to, to help force the evacuation of those areas? But all in all, we fared pretty well.
Let's get more into detail with particular, you mentioned some of these, but let's start with back to evacuation routes. Where would you like us to be?
Well, I think we do a pretty good job right now. Obviously, Sarasota County takes the lead in emergency management. And, we have gone ahead, and Suzanne, you may be familiar with this, we've gone ahead and labeled all of the areas using the stop signs and signposts with evacuation, A, you'll see a big yellow tag, say A, B, C, D, and so on and so forth. So I think we are pretty good in terms of identifying areas. People just need to be aware as to, what their evacuation zone is, and when they hear that evacuation A, zone needs to be evacuated, they need to pay attention to that.
Okay, status on pumping stations.
Very good. Again, lessons learned. We learned through Irma that a lot of our lift stations and a lot of our water wells were inundated with, with water. Also, too, because electricity went out. And so, post Irma, we purchased a number of portable generators, and we had them stationed at all of the lift stations and all of the city wells.
Let's talk about process, specifically zoning and building code. What are the regulations? Do we have updated language and filters in our regulatory process that takes these threats of climate change into account?
Yeah. One of the things that, and again, I have to give credit to the City Commission and their wisdom, we started to look at how we could implement a green building code to ensure that, when buildings are built or even when retrofitted, they take advantage of a lot of, the green energy, the green building type infrastructure that's in place today. And so one of the things that Orlando has done, they've adopted a green building code. And so we've used South Face, the same group that Orlando used to help us implement a green building code. It has not yet been adopted, but we've been working with all of our industry partners, like the Gulf Coast Builders Exchange. We've been working with the building industry to see if this is something that they can adapt in terms of, getting their membership aware as to what green building codes are, what green building industrial standards are.
The city has some very big public-private projects on the table now, especially the Bay Park. How is climate change and severe weather being taken into account with all that we are doing, especially that massive park?
Great question, great question. So obviously right now, as you know, it's a sea of asphalt. And that in of itself is, not something that's conducive to, to really improving the environment. And so taking the 53 acres and turning it into that blue-green oasis is the first step in helping to adapt, that 53 acres to more of an environmental and sustainable piece of property. The state of Florida just awarded the Bay Park with a $10 million grant to help raise Van Wezel Way and to help with, cleaning some of the basins in and around that whole 10th Street area, that whole Hawk Creek area as well. Look at the work that they did with, the bayou, the mangrove bayou and the mangrove walk in terms of cleaning that out and really making it a gem and something that is usable by all.
Okay, what about new road construction and evacuation routes? If Ian had hit us directly.
So working with FDOT, they have raised both the Fruitville and 41 intersection with that new roundabout. The Gulfstream roundabout has also been risen, and also what we call the gap project between the Gulfstream roundabout and the Fruitville roundabout, that has also been raised about 4 feet. And so, with all of the new infrastructure in terms of stormwater that has been put in place, the widening of the 2nd Street Canal that runs between the Ritz Hotel and the new Ritz residences at the quay, that has all been cleaned out. That has all been put underground in a bigger conduit, and so that is helping to drain that area differently than how it was in the past.
Final question. Our city is going through a transformative period of growth and development, as we all know. So 10 or 15 years from now, what would you like the people in our community to say that Marlon Brown did to contribute to our city and make it better?
We have listened to the greater community. I know there are individuals who may have different perspectives in terms of how the city grows or how we move forward in the future. But we want to ensure that this is a community for all, that it's a community for generations to come, and that when people look back at the work that we've done, they said, what, whoever did that, and again, it doesn't have to be Marlon Brown, whoever did that really did a great job of accommodating, everyone.
As Marlon pointed out, the county's in charge when it comes to emergencies like Ian. We end with former chair of the county commission and respected community leader Charles Hines. He spoke frankly about the impact of Ian and the need for change. We're going to be talking about the big picture on Sarasota County and the long-term effects of Hurricane Ian. But first, you're program director of the Florida Gulf Coast Trail.
It's going to be hard to approach Collier and Lee County for a little while, because obviously you and I serving government, this is emergent. It's still an emergency situation. And, when it comes back to, building infrastructure and roads and taking care of their citizens, a trail is more than just an amenity. But in your list of priorities right now, we got to get bridges fixed. We got to get people's lives. We got to get roofs over their heads. Then let's talk about it. But the one thing trails can do is, from an environmental and a stormwater standpoint, is we do a lot of corrections of things that were, let's say in the past, stormwater wasn't even being considered. So, the rail corridor here through Sarasota County, built in, I don't know, the 20s or 30s, you just would bring fill in and put a rail line down. Well, you blocked wetlands. You didn't think about those types of things. So it's more than a trail. It's a lot of restoration and rethinking stormwater.
You were on the county commission in 2017 when Hurricane Irma hit. So what did we learn as far as preparedness and how we tackle, or how we're now tackling Hurricane Ian?
Well, we learned a lot, and luckily Irma didn't hit us directly. But what we did do is we did an after the fact review and brought in Dr. Fugate from FEMA and looked at what we did right, what we did wrong, and said, okay, for the next one, here are some things that you need to implement. The good news is Sarasota County took that very, very seriously and did implement many of those recommendations, and it helped a lot. One thing that we learned with Irma was, when power goes out, your wastewater pumps go out. And we didn't have enough generators, portable generators, to go and get these things back online. And so within a day or two, people are, flushing toilets, trying to do laundry, and there's a lot of problems when those manholes start overflowing, and it happened. This time, we didn't see that as much. And I saw it in my own neighborhood in that our power was out. That started happening within an hour or so of that being reported. Sarasota County delivered a portable generator and got that pump station going again. So that was a great lesson learned in having those available, knowing that it's going to happen, and be prepared to do it. The other big thing that we learned too is everyone talks about shelters, build more shelters. Well, yes, no, maybe. And I say that because the location of the shelter is key. If Fort Myers Beach built a shelter on Fort Myers Beach, everyone in that shelter probably would have been killed. Same thing like in our area. It doesn't make any sense to build a shelter on Longboat Key or on the island of the city of Venice. Now when you see what storm surge can do, local government has to be smart on how we direct people away from the water and get them to places that are safe.
This is a pretty serious question on, it's kind of the talk of the town in a way, that what effect will Ian have on housing? Both affordable housing and housing for retirees and working class folks.
What's going to happen now? So the supply of homes have gone down. So you talked about affordable. A lot of those affordable housings are mobile homes. A lot of those areas have been destroyed. Then how do you have workers or material to come in and get homes back to a level that's livable? Interest rates are bumping up again. Homeowners insurance was in trouble before. I can't imagine what it's going to be 6 months or a year from now. So how are our workforce folks? I'm asking questions because it was bad enough before. I'm really nervous what it's going to be in a year from now.
Well, again, and to follow up on that a little more specifically, as we talk about the real estate and home insurance isn't a pretty picture right now. So what are your thoughts on how to manage spiraling premiums on where underwriters are going bankrupt? There's a stampede of underwriters going bankrupt, and most of the population lives near the coastline. So what do we do?
I don't know. I hate to say that because it didn't seem like we had an answer before. There was a couple companies that, like you said, were filing bankruptcy or leaving Florida already. You sure hate to have citizens take over the whole entire state. But that may be the reality, because that means that us as taxpayers are on the hook for all of that type of thing. And, this is tough that this is being recorded, but I think people are really going to start thinking about land use, development, those types of things of where do you build? And those always come up. But everyone wants to live on the beach. It's beautiful. But if more and more construction codes, building codes, we talked about affordable housing. Well, those impact glass, those impact windows are great, but they are very expensive. This hurricane's going to raise a lot of questions about how we build in Florida and how we deal with it. So when you're developing projects, is there sufficient stormwater? Is your stormwater facilities sufficient to hold that water so they don't overflow? You just can't, like in the 50s and 60s, cut a ditch and just run all your water into the bay. And that's what we used to do. And so when local officials think about development and redevelopment, Bobby Jones Golf Course, how do we redo things that we have multiple benefits to our community? So I think that'll be a rethinking of how we do things.
Charles is right. We need to evolve. We need to change. Public safety comes first. Education is next. Local zoning and building regulations are the logical place to start. In closing, there are many lessons to be learned from Ian. First, climate change is not a future thing. It is here, right now, and it has been for some time. Second, to achieve big solutions that make society better, we need a public-private and scientific partnership, like the Bay Park Conservancy. And finally, attention developers, do not build a house on a sandbar or a levee next to a river, and then ask the taxpayers to subsidize your profits. The Wild West days in Florida are over. If you would like more information on climate change, hurricanes, flood insurance, and public policy, visit these links. And you can always watch this episode and all our past shows on my YouTube and website. Well, that wraps up another one. Hope you learned something and enjoyed the show. Until next time, thanks for watching. I'm Suzanne Atwell, and we'll be seeing you around town.
Atwell Media is a registered, not-for-profit 501c3. If you would like to support local public service programming like this, please visit our website, SuzanneAtwell.org, to make a tax-deductible donation. Thank you for watching.